January 13th, 1943, 28,000 feet above the English Channel. The bitter cold at high altitude crept through Hauptmann Wilhelm Keller's flight suit, despite the heated cockpit of his Focke-Wulf 190A4. The sleek German fighter, with its distinctive radial engine and broad menacing nose, cut through the thin air with practiced precision. Keller led a formation of 12 FW-190s, the pride of the Luftwaffe fighter force. His eyes, constantly scanning the vast expanse of clouds and blue, searched for the American bomber formation, reported to be crossing from England. Achtung, his radio crackled. Amerikanische Bomber, 12 Uhr. Bombers at 12 o'clock. Keller's lips curled into a confident smile beneath his oxygen mask. The Americans were persistent, if nothing else. Their daylight bombing campaign was brave but foolish. The skies over Europe belonged to the Luftwaffe. 3 years of combat experience had honed the German fighter force into a lethal weapon. The Americans were newcomers, their pilots green, their tactics unproven. As his formation climbed toward the bomber stream, Keller noticed something unusual on the horizon: larger fighters flying high above the B-17s. Not the usual Spitfires or the sleek P-38 Lightnings he had encountered before. These were different, bulkier, almost comical in appearance. "Was ist das?" came the voice of his wingman. "Sehen Sie diese fetten Flugzeuge?" Keller squinted against the glare. The American aircraft looked ungainly, with bulbous fuselages and thick, straight wings. They reminded him of flying milk bottles or barrels with wings. Intelligence reports had mentioned a new fighter type, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, but these couldn't possibly be serious combat aircraft. Not with that shape. "Thunderbolts," he radioed back. "Die Amerikaner nennen sie Jugs. Krüger, wie passend." How fitting to call them jugs. The German pilots chuckled over the radio. These fat, underpowered American fighters would be easy prey for the nimble Focke-Wulfs. Keller had shot down 17 Allied aircraft, Spitfires, Hurricanes, even the occasional Mosquito. These overweight newcomers would simply add to his tally. "Angreifen," he ordered. "Attack!" The 12 FW-190s rolled into a dive, engines screaming as they plunged toward the American formation. Keller selected one of the bulky P-47s and lined up his shot, finger tensing on the trigger of his 20mm cannons. The range closed rapidly. 8,000 feet, 6,000 feet, 4,000 feet. At 2,000 feet, he opened fire, orange tracer rounds streaming toward the American fighter. The P-47 suddenly rolled right, far more nimbly than Keller had anticipated. His cannon shells passed harmlessly through empty air. Before he could adjust his aim, the American fighter had reversed direction, turning to face him head-on. What happened next would remain seared in Keller's memory forever. 8 streams of tracer fire erupted from the wings of the P-47. Not the usual 4 or 6 guns of other fighters, but 8 heavy machine guns firing simultaneously. The sheer volume of fire was unlike anything Keller had ever witnessed. A solid wall of 50 caliber bullets, each weighing nearly 2 ounces, ripped through the air toward his Focke-Wulf. He yanked his stick hard to the left, but not before several rounds tore through his right wing, shredding metal and sending vibrations through the entire airframe. His aircraft shuddered violently. Warning lights flashed across his instrument panel. Hydraulic pressure dropping, fuel pressure fluctuating, temperature rising dangerously. "Mein Gott!" he gasped. One burst from that American fighter had nearly torn his wing off. Across the sky, the battle had transformed into chaos. The P-47s, which had appeared so ungainly and awkward, moved with unexpected agility. They dove with frightening speed, their massive 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engines, propelling them faster than any fighter Keller had encountered. When the FW-190s tried to escape by diving, a tactic that had worked against Spitfires, the P-47s followed, actually gaining speed. "Ich bin getroffen. Ich verliere Öldruck." One of Keller's pilots screamed over the radio. "Hit, losing oil pressure." A second later, another panicked voice. "Flammen, mein Motor brennt!" "Flames! My engine's on fire!" Keller watched in horror as one of his most experienced pilots, Feldwebel Ernst Schlager, attempted to dive away from a pursuing Thunderbolt. The American fighter stayed with him easily, its 850 calibers hammering the German aircraft until it erupted in flames and began its fatal spiral toward the channel below. With his damaged aircraft struggling to maintain altitude, Keller made the bitter decision. Abbrechen zurück zur Basis, abort, return to base. As the remaining Focke-Wulfs disengaged, jettisoning drop tanks and using clouds for cover, Keller glanced back at the American formation. The bombers continued undisturbed toward their target, while the P-47s maintained their protective screen. 4 of his 12 fighters would not return to base that day. March 29, 1943, Luftwaffe Fighter Command Headquarters, Berlin. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, general of the fighter arm of the Luftwaffe, scowled at the intelligence reports spread across his desk. The Americans were sending deeper raids into German territory, and the situation was becoming increasingly troublesome. The losses among his experienced pilots were mounting at an alarming rate. "The P-47 Thunderbolt," began Major Hans Weber, the intelligence officer who had requested this meeting. "We initially dismissed it, called it the flying milk bottle or jug because of its appearance. I'm aware of our pilots' nicknames for enemy aircraft," Galland replied tersely. As a fighter ace himself, with 104 confirmed victories, he understood the psychology behind mockery. It helped pilots manage fear, but mockery would not stop American bullets. "Sir, we've severely underestimated this aircraft." Weber placed a technical diagram on the desk. "The P-47 is powered by the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, generating 2,000 horsepower, the most powerful fighter engine in production. It gives the aircraft a top speed of 433 miles per hour and an exceptional rate of climb." Galland studied the specifications with growing concern. "And the armament?" 8 50 caliber Browning machine guns, each capable of firing 800 rounds per minute. That's over 6,400 rounds per minute combined, the heaviest firepower of any fighter in the war. Each gun is loaded with 425 rounds, giving them tremendous staying power in extended engagements. "How are they producing these monsters?" Galland asked. Weber hesitated. "That's the most troubling part, sir. According to our intelligence, the Americans began full production only last year. Republic Aviation's Farmingdale factory on Long Island is operating around the clock. They've expanded from a capacity of 60 aircraft per month in January 1942 to over 300 per month now, and they're building a second factory in Evansville, Indiana." Galland stood and walked to the window, looking out over Berlin. The skies were clear today, no air raid sirens, no distant rumble of B-17s. But for how much longer? "The Americans have another advantage we cannot match," Weber continued. "Their aircraft production remains completely untouched by our bombers. Their factories operate without fear of air attack, while ours—" He didn't need to finish the thought. German aircraft production was under constant harassment from Allied bombing. "There's something else, sir." Weber's voice lowered. "Our pilots report that when they damage these P-47s, they often remain flyable. The cockpit is protected by armor plating. The control cables are duplicated. Even with significant damage, many P-47s make it back to England." "And the pilots?" Galland asked, though he already knew the answer. "Fresh replacements arrive daily from America. They come from an enormous training program that graduates thousands of pilots every month. Their training cycles are uninterrupted by air raids or fuel shortages." Galland returned to his desk, his expression grim. "We mock what we fear, Major. Our pilots called it the flying milk bottle, because its appearance was comical, non-threatening. But there is nothing comical about what it represents." "Sir?" "American industrial might. That's what the P-47 represents. One factory in New York producing more fighters per month than some of our entire production lines. And now they're building a second factory." Galland's voice trailed off. "While we struggle to train pilots with our dwindling fuel reserves, they practice formation flying over the Grand Canyon." May 4, 1943. Repair hangar, Luftwaffe airfield at Saint-Omer, occupied France. Oberleutnant Kurt Müller ran his hand along the torn metal skin of his Messerschmitt Bf-109G. 3 weeks ago, he had encountered the American Thunderbolts for the first time. The experience had left his aircraft riddled with bullet holes and himself with a newfound respect for American engineering. "You're lucky to be alive," observed the chief mechanic, a grizzled veteran named Helmut Schmidt. "I've seen what these .50 caliber rounds do to an aircraft. One is bad enough. A burst of 8 guns is usually fatal." Müller nodded grimly. "We were told they couldn't turn, that they were too heavy, but above 25,000 feet they turned just fine. And when they dive, he shook his head. Nothing can catch them in a dive. Schmidt gestured to a wooden crate nearby. Inside was a mangled piece of metal, the remnant of a .50 caliber bullet that had passed through the engine block of another Bf-109. We recovered this from Lieutenant Becker's engine. Single round, but it went straight through the block. American quality. There was a begrudging respect in Schmidt's voice. They don't make things to last a specified time, like we sometimes must to conserve materials. They make things to last forever, with twice the necessary strength, using 3 times the material we would allocate. Miller picked up the distorted bullet fragment. It was larger than the 7.92mm rounds fired by their own aircraft machine guns. 8 of these guns on each fighter, he mused. How do they power all of them without jamming? Our guns freeze at high altitude half the time. Schmidt smiled wryly. Electrical heating systems for all gun bays and ammunition feeds. Even their ammunition belts are heated. He pointed to the damaged wing of Miller's Messerschmitt. See where these rounds hit? 3 .50 caliber bullets struck within an inch of each other. That's not luck, that's engineering. Their harmonization and gun mounting systems keep their weapons aligned even during high G maneuvers. A commotion at the hangar entrance interrupted their conversation. A truck had arrived with parts for repairs, a rare and welcome sight. However, the delivery was smaller than expected. Only 6 replacement engines, Schmidt questioned the supply officer. I requested 15. I have 12 aircraft grounded waiting for engine replacements. The supply officer, a thin man with perpetually worried eyes, handed over a clipboard. Be grateful for what you received, Herr Schmidt. The factory in Stuttgart was hit again 3 days ago. Production is at 30% capacity. After the officer left, Schmidt turned to Müller, his expression dark. You know what the Americans call the P-47? The juggernaut, the unstoppable force. Do you know why it looks so bulky? So unlike our sleek fighters? Miller shook his head. Because they don't care about material shortages. Each P-47 contains over 6,000 pounds of aluminum, nearly twice what we use in a Bf-109. Their engine displaces 2,800 cubic inches. Ours? He pointed to the damaged Daimler-Benz engine being removed from another fighter. Just 1,750 cubic inches. Their fuel tanks hold 305 gallons standard, with drop tanks adding another 200 gallons. Our 109s carry just 170 gallons maximum. The chief mechanic's voice dropped to a near whisper. We are asked to make aircraft lighter, to use less material, less fuel. They make theirs heavier, stronger, thirstier, because they can. That is the real enemy we face, Oberleutnant. Not just their pilots, but their factories, their mines, their oil fields, their boundless resources. Müller stared at his damaged fighter. The repair crews had marked each bullet hole with chalk. He counted 37 marks. 37 hits, Schmidt noted, following Müller's gaze. Yet you made it home. If this were an American P-47, with its armored cockpit, self-sealing fuel tanks, and redundant control systems, these 37 hits would be considered minor damage. He sighed heavily. Your 109 will fly again, but I had to cannibalize parts from 2 other aircraft to make it happen. The Americans simply build another Thunderbolt. July 17th, 1943. Interrogation Room, POW Processing Center, England. Hauptmann Walter Schröder sat stiffly in the metal chair, his Luftwaffe uniform stripped of insignia, his face still bearing the cuts and bruises from his crash landing 3 days earlier. Across the table, an American intelligence officer, Captain James Thornton, reviewed a file while occasionally glancing up at the German prisoner. Comfortable, Hauptmann? Thornton asked in passable German. Schröder didn't respond. He had been prepared for interrogation, name, rank, service number, nothing more. He had expected harsh treatment, perhaps even torture. Instead, he had received medical care, decent food, and surprisingly respectful treatment from his captors. I thought you might be interested in seeing what shot you down, Thornton continued, sliding a photograph across the table. P-47 Thunderbolt, 78th Fighter Group. The pilot was Lieutenant Michael Collins, age 24, from Wisconsin. Despite his training, Schröder couldn't resist looking at the image. The P-47 stood on an airfield, its massive propeller gleaming in the sunlight, ground crew swarming around it like worker bees around a queen. The sheer scale of the aircraft was impressive. It dwarfed the men working on it. We've noted your staffel has encountered P-47s on 6 separate occasions, Thornton continued, consulting his notes. You lost 11 aircraft in those engagements, while managing to shoot down only 2 Thunderbolts. Schroeder remained silent, but his jaw tightened. The statistics were accurate and damning. We've had reports that Luftwaffe pilots initially mocked the P-47, Thornton said casually. Called it the flying milk bottle or jug because of its appearance. I'm curious if you still find it amusing. Schroeder's professional discipline finally cracked. We were told they were inferior aircraft flown by inferior pilots, he said bitterly. Our intelligence was incomplete. Thornton nodded sympathetically. Would it surprise you to learn that Republic Aviation will produce its 5,000th P-47 next month? They're rolling off assembly lines at a rate of 400 per month now. The number struck Schroeder like a physical blow. 5,000? Germany's entire fighter production for 1943 would struggle to reach that number. But the aircraft is only part of the story, Thornton continued. Each P-47 consumes 110 gallons of fuel per hour at cruise power. That's approximately 417 liters in your measurement. How does that compare to your fuel allocation for training flights these days? The question was pointed, designed to highlight a painful reality. Schroeder had commanded a training unit before his transfer to combat operations. In his final month as an instructor, his entire staffel had been allocated less than 1,000 liters of aviation fuel per week, enough for barely 2 hours of flight time for a single P-47. We're also curious about your ammunition situation, Thornton pressed. Each P-47 carries 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition. We've noticed Luftwaffe fighters becoming increasingly conservative with ammunition. Some gun camera footage shows your pilots firing single-second bursts rather than sustained fire. Schroeder remained stoic, but the accuracy of the Americans' assessment was unsettling. Ammunition conservation had indeed become standard practice, another sign of Germany's strained resources. Thornton slid another document across the table, a production chart. Republic Aviation's Farmingdale factory operates 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The Evansville factory came online in September 1942 and is now producing 175 P-47s per month, in addition to Farmingdale's 300 monthly units. Combined output will exceed 500 aircraft per month by year's end. The German pilots stared at the chart, its implications clear and devastating. Germany could not match these production figures, not with Allied bombing disrupting factories, transportation, and raw material supply. You know what we call the P-47 now? Thornton asked. The Hun killer. Your pilots started with mockery. Ours ended with respect and victory. Schroeder finally looked up, meeting the American's gaze. Why are you telling me this? Thornton gathered his papers and stood. Because tomorrow you'll be transferred to a permanent POW camp in Canada. You'll meet other Luftwaffe pilots there, men who still believe in eventual victory, men who don't understand what they're truly fighting against. He paused at the door. It's not just our planes, Hauptmann. It's our factories, our oil fields, our training programs, our ability to replace everything you destroy twice over. After Thornton left, Schroeder remained seated, staring at the photographs and production charts left deliberately within his view. The American hadn't needed to torture him for information. The truth itself was the torture, the revelation that Germany had already lost the air war, not in the skies over Europe, but on the assembly lines of New York and Indiana. In the end, the Luftwaffe wasn't defeated by the flying milk bottle. It was defeated by what the ungainly fighter represented, American industrial might, unleashed and unstoppable, producing not just aircraft, but the ammunition to arm them, the fuel to fly them, and the pilots to master them, all beyond the reach of German bombs. The flying milk bottle had transformed from an object of derision to a harbinger of defeat. And its message was clear. Mockery is the first refuge of those who fear what they cannot understand or stop. September 3rd, 1943. Republic Aviation Factory, Farmingdale, Long Island. The cavernous assembly hall hummed with activity as 3,350 workers, nearly half of them women, moved with practiced efficiency along the P-47 production line. Massive overhead cranes swung 2,000-pound R-2800 engines into position, while riveters secured wing spars capable of withstanding 13.5 G force maneuvers. Factory manager Robert Stevens checked his clipboard. 16 complete Thunderbolts had rolled out yesterday. Today's quota was 17. By month's end, daily production would reach 20 aircraft. 600 per month from this facility alone. That's our 6,000th P-47, Stevens told the visiting Army Air Force delegation, pointing to an aircraft receiving final touches. From initial design approval to 6,000 units in just 30 months. Colonel James Bennett whistled softly. And Evansville? Their 2,000th rolls out this week. Combined production now exceeds 800 aircraft monthly. The visitors paused at a station where workers installed the 850 caliber Browning machine guns, each weighing 64 pounds, a ton of firepower per aircraft. We're shipping 75% to England for the 8th Air Force, Stevens continued, the rest to Italy and the Pacific. Latest modifications include water injection for the engines, provides an extra 300 horsepower in combat situations. We're also reinforcing the lower wings to carry 2,500-pound bombs or 165-gallon drop tanks. Bennett nodded appreciatively, turning a heavy fighter into a fighter bomber, resourceful. Survival rate is what we're proudest of, Stevens replied. P-47s are returning from missions with hundreds of bullet holes. One came back with 6 feet of wing missing. The pilots call it their flying tank. November 12, 1943. Luftwaffe airfield, northern Italy. Lieutenant Franz Weber stared in disbelief at the reconnaissance photographs. Hundreds of P-47s lined up wingtip to wingtip at a forward base near Foggia, Italy. How many? Asked Major Hoffman. Intelligence estimates 300 Thunderbolts in Italy alone, with 1,000 more in England. Monthly losses are fully replaced within days. Hoffman's weathered face darkened. And our situation? Weber hesitated. Our entire Gruppe has 26 operational aircraft. Fuel reserves allow for 2 sorties per day, shared among all squadrons. And replacements? 8 Mi-109s promised by month's end. Maybe 5 will actually arrive. Outside the command post, mechanics cannibalized parts from 3 damaged fighters to make 1 airworthy. Aviation gasoline was stored in scattered drums, just 11,000 liters for the entire week's operations. Their abundance against our scarcity, Hoffman murmured. Their single pilot training program graduates more airmen monthly than we have in all of Italy. Sir, Weber added reluctantly, captured documents show each American fighter group receives 24,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition daily. That's 3,000 rounds per aircraft. Hoffman laughed bitterly. We allot 1,000 rounds per aircraft weekly, if we're fortunate. Later, watching his remaining pilots scramble to intercept an incoming raid, Hoffman recognized the brutal equation. American factories were producing aircraft, ammunition, and fuel faster than Germany could destroy them. Meanwhile, German production faltered under relentless bombing. We mocked them as technically inferior, he told Weber, as the P-47s appeared overhead. Yet their so-called inferiority comes wrapped in layers of steel our bullets cannot penetrate, powered by engines we cannot match, built in quantities we cannot comprehend. The sky filled with American fighters, once derided as flying milk bottles, now respected as harbingers of defeat. Germany's technological edge had been overwhelmed by American industrial might. Each lost Messerschmitt was irreplaceable. Each fallen Thunderbolt was merely one of hundreds rolling off assembly lines that day. The war of mockery had ended. The war of attrition had begun. February 8, 1944. Briefing room, Luftwaffe Fighter Wing 3, Eastern France. The room fell silent as Oberst Werner Klein unfolded a map marked with red circles, American fighter coverage zones. The circles now overlapped across most of Germany. The P-47 has evolved, Klein announced grimly. With their new 108-gallon belly tanks and 165-gallon wing tanks, Thunderbolts now escort bombers to targets 850 miles from their bases. All of Germany lies within their reach. He displayed a gun camera photograph showing a Thunderbolt carrying 2 1,000-pound bombs under its wings. They've transformed their heavy fighter into a fighter bomber. After escorting bombers, they hunt our airfields, trains, and fuel depots. Hauptmann Rudolf Braun, who had survived 3 encounters with P-47s, studied intelligence reports with growing dread. American factories had delivered 12,602 Thunderbolts since production began. The Luftwaffe had lost 14,800 fighters of all types over the same period. Their individual pilots improve as well, Klein continued. American combat tours require 300 flight hours. Our new pilots receive 112 hours before deployment, down from 210 last year. Braun's hand clenched involuntarily. His last 7 replacement pilots had averaged just 90 hours. 4 had died on their first mission. March 17, 1944, 30,000 feet above Frankfurt. Captain David Anderson led his P-47 squadron through scattered clouds, 16 Thunderbolts escorting B-17s toward their target. Each fighter carried 370 gallons of fuel and 3,400 rounds of ammunition. Anderson's headphones crackled. "Bandits, 3 o'clock high." 12 Messerschmitt 109s dove toward the bomber formation. Anderson keyed his radio. "Apex Squadron, drop tanks and engage." The Thunderbolts jettisoned empty auxiliary tanks and turned to meet the threat. 8. 50 caliber machine guns ready in each aircraft. The German fighters, seeing the P-47s respond, immediately scattered. "They're breaking off," Anderson's wingman reported, surprised. "They're learning," Anderson replied. "Continue escort mission." The brief, inconclusive engagement highlighted a new reality. Many Luftwaffe pilots now avoided P-47s entirely, focusing instead on unescorted bomber formations or weaker targets. The psychological impact of the Thunderbolt had grown beyond its physical threat. April 9, 1944, prisoner transfer camp, Bavaria. Feldwebel Hans Müller, a captured Luftwaffe pilot, stared in disbelief at the American newspaper provided by his interrogator. A full-page advertisement showed Republic Aviation's sprawling factory with the headline, "7 acres of Thunderbolts." The text boasted, "Republic's Farmingdale plant covers 1,630,000 square feet, nearly 7 acres under one roof, dedicated to P-47 production. Our 12,000 employees working around the clock produce a complete Thunderbolt every 45 minutes." Another page displayed the Pratt & Whitney engine plant. "We've built our 50,000th R2800 engine this month. Each 2,000 horsepower double wasp powers America's greatest fighter to heights above 40,000 feet. Müller recalled his squadron's last engagement, 4 Me-109s against 12 Thunderbolts. 2 German pilots died, the Americans suffered no losses. His own aircraft, struck by 15 50 caliber rounds, lost oil pressure and crash-landed. The P-47 that shot him down had continued fighting with part of its rudder missing. The advertisement concluded with words that haunted Müller. "This conveyor belt of American power won't stop until victory is complete." The psychological effect was devastating. Germany couldn't match America's industrial output or resource abundance. Their factories worked at night under blackout conditions, constantly relocated due to bombing. American factories operated 24 hours daily, untouched by enemy action, their only limitation being how quickly raw materials could be delivered. What had begun as mockery of an ungainly aircraft had transformed into fear, then respect, and finally resignation. The flying milk bottle had become a symbol of inevitable defeat, not through superior tactics or technology, but through America's unstoppable industrial might. May 8, 1945. Disbanded Luftwaffe Airfield, Bavaria. Former Luftwaffe Colonel Werner Mölders watched American P-47s fly overhead, not in combat formation, but in victory patterns. The war in Europe had ended. A captured P-47 sat on the airfield, examined by American technicians. The aircraft had survived 167 combat missions, absorbing over 200 documented hits while destroying 11 German fighters. "We could never understand how they built them so strong," Mölders told the American officer beside him. "Our fighters were technical marvels, precise, agile, but fragile." Captain Thomas Reynolds nodded. The Republic factory produced 15,677 Thunderbolts during the war. A P-47 came off the assembly line every 30 minutes at peak production. Mölders shook his head in quiet resignation. "We measured production in dozens, you measured in thousands." Reynolds gestured toward the P-47. "This aircraft has 8 tons of crushing power, 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition, a 2,800 cubic inch engine, and 11 hardpoints for bombs and rockets. But its real strength wasn't in its design. It was in your factories," Mölders finished, "in your ability to replace losses overnight, to ship endless supplies of ammunition, fuel, and spare parts." "We called it the Juggernaut," Reynolds said. "You called it the flying milk bottle." Mölders watched the P-47s disappear into the distance. "We were wrong to mock what we didn't understand. By the time we realized our mistake, it was already too late." Like this video? Hit subscribe to join our channel for more untold stories of WWII's industrial titans.